I'm playing the intro again because the feather falling effect costs $20 and I'll be damned if I'm not getting my money's worth. Now, here's the thing. If you had just watched the first episode of SNO, I really wouldn't blame you for thinking it was the most cliched thing that you had seen in years. The opening joke that I hate disregarded, the characters all seem really generic at first glance. I mean, just in the first season, you have Yukos, the emotionless robot with a secret dark past, Sohora, the childhood friend, Suguda the nerd, Mikako, the student council president, and later in the season, we're introduced to NIMH, the twin-tailed lowly tsundere, and of course, our generic everyman protagonist, Sakurai Tomoki. And that's not even counting all the characters that show up later on, like Astria, the idiot blonde with big boobs, Hiyori, the most popular girl in school, and Chaos, the crazy murder kill machine. But that summary is really only skin deep, because just like the show itself, there is a lot more going on with the characters than a casual glance would reveal. I always say that SNO is the pinnacle of its genre, the absolute best that a show like this could ever be. And nowhere is that more evident than with its cast. Sure, they all start out as clichés, but Suu Minazuki's godlike writing uses that as a base to build off of, and every single one of them develops over time. And to prove that point, I have two characters that I want to take a look at here today. I'm going to examine their character progression over the course of the first season to give you a better understanding of how they evolve, even in that limited amount of time. So with that in mind, let's take a look at our first example, Eijirou. Now, the cliché being used as a foundation in her case is that she's an emotionless robot with a secret dark past that she's forgotten. So far, so chopits. Her main character arc spans the entire first season, or maybe character arcs would be more accurate, because it's actually a series of them. So here's how it goes. Initially, Yukos identifies herself as a pet class angeloid created by the Synapse, but beyond that has no memories. All she knows is that since she imprinted onto Tomoki, her only purpose in life is to fulfill his every desire. But as you saw in the first episode, Tomoki's pervertedness and lack of forethought often place him in situations that cause him suffering, and Yukos is very quick to blame herself for that. After all, the only purpose in life that she knows is to make Tomoki happy, but her very presence in his life seems to do the exact opposite, and her every attempt to fix that only ever makes it worse. But at the same time, Tomoki is the kind of guy who will outright admit that he's always dreamed of having a sexy robot made, but now that he actually has one, and worse, one that is very obviously sentient, it makes him really uncomfortable. He places a very high value on personal freedom, so Yukos living solely for the purpose of pleasing him has the exact opposite effect, and actually makes him really uncomfortable. And this first mini-character arc is completed in episode 3, when Yukos asks Sukuta what she should do about it, and he tells her that living for her own sake is what will make Tomoki happy, and to that end, she vows to become more and more human-like. Her second character arc then involves her attempting to do this, and usually failing for reasons she doesn't understand. For example, in episode 3, she is tasked by Tomoki to go shopping by herself, and it's while doing this that we're introduced to one of Yukos' quirks. In the middle of buying ingredients to make curry, she stops at a fruit stand and buys a watermelon entirely of her own volition, which is unusual to say the least, considering she's only been following orders up until now. So, you might not believe this, but Yukos' character is very closely tied to watermelons. No, seriously, it's in practically all of the art of her. And that may seem weird, even to people who've seen the entire show, because they never outright explain why. Now, no doubt most people just see it as a random character quirk, some generic eccentricity introduced to set her apart from the thousands of other pink-haired anime girls. But no, there is actually a reason for it, which the show does explain. But the explanation comes in the form of a single 5-second scene, and is only told through the animation and a clever cut. So if you didn't pick up on it then, and most people didn't, then you never will. Here's the scene. Did you pick up on it? What that cut is showing us is that Yukos uses the watermelon as a conduit to project emotions that confuse her. She knows that Tomoki rubbing her head makes her feel something, but doesn't understand what it is or why that is, and so does the same thing to the watermelon, hoping to eventually understand it. And like I said, if you didn't get that from that one single cut, you never will. At no point does Tomoki go, "Oh, I bet Yukos carries that watermelon with her everywhere because she doesn't understand what emotions are." No, it's left entirely to each viewer to read into, and is a really clever use of background storytelling that I appreciate immensely. So, like I said earlier, Yukos, despite not having emotions or common sense, tries her hardest to be more human for Tomoki's sake, but constantly messes up, which she expects will make Tomoki hate her, but to the contrary, seeing that she's trying so hard for his sake makes Tomoki happy, which then in turn makes Yukos happy. And then a wrench is thrown into all of that when NIMH shows up. NIMH, another angeloid and all-time best waifu, just appears one day and hangs around Yukos like it's totally normal. Literally, the episode starts and she's just sitting in the house watching TV, and Tomoki's like, "Fuck, they're multiplying!" So, NIMH's character arc is very closely tied to Yukos's, and she is my second example of building off cliches, so I figure I'll just go over her at the same time. But in order to do that, I have to go off on this whole other separate rant about tsunderes, so just bear with me for a bit, okay? Okay. So, the first impression that I had of NIMH was that she was about as stock as tsunderes come, and God, I hate tsunderes so much. That cliche has been used and reused time and time again, like a sex worker on the night the sailors dock into port. Now, Digibro made the point in his Asterisk War Sucks series that what separates a good tsundere from a bad tsundere is a reason for them to act the way they do. He uses as an example Luis from the Familiar of Zero. Luis, he says, comes from a highly prestigious family, but sucks at doing magic and is constantly ridiculed for it. Hence her abrasive attitude. It makes sense in-universe for her character to act that way. Now, I agree with that to a point, but I don't think that simply having a reason to be a tsundere is the major defining point of what makes them good or bad. It's a step in the right direction, sure, but it's definitely not everything. Now, in my mind, the thing that really separates a bad tsundere from a good tsundere, and something the vast majority of anime completely ignore, is that tsundere, by its very nature, is supposed to be a character flaw that is eventually overcome, not the defining point of the character. I mean, the word itself is a combination of tsun, which means disgust, and dere, which means love. They start off disgusted with the guy, but eventually fall in love with him. The transformation is the whole point. It's in the fucking name. Returning then to Luis, sure, she has a reason to act like a bitch, but over the course of 4 seasons, even after her and the main character have basically gotten married, she never stops acting like a bitch, which is why, in my mind, she is a shitty example of a tsundere. Whereas, I'd say someone like Shauna from Shikugen no Shauna, whom Digi cites as being shitty because of a admittedly retarded plot point in Season 2, I think is actually a much better example of how to do a tsundere correctly. I mean, by the time Season 3 rolls around and the show finally becomes good, Shauna is in love with Yuji and will happily admit it to whoever asks. Hell, she goes to war for the dude. So contrast that to how she started off as in the first season, hating his guts and thinking nothing of him, and you can see a very clear character arc there. She started off one way and ended another way. She's completed the tsundere transformation, which is why, in my opinion, Shauna is one of the rare examples of a tsundere done right. And now we have to ask ourselves, is NIMH a good tsundere? Well, the first question is, does she have a reason to act the way she does? I'd say yes. She's lived in Synapse her entire life, which is basically sci-fi heaven, and has been contracted to Minos, the villain, ever since she was first built. As a result of living billions of years in paradise, Minos has become excruciatingly bored with his perfect life, and gains enjoyment from killing humans, or downers as he calls them. And that's because they live down there, not because they ruin all his parties. And he views them as nothing but bugs to be squashed for his amusement. And NIMH, having lived in Synapse all her life while being bound to the villain, has picked up quite a few of his personality traits. So yes, I'd say she has a pretty good reason to be a tsundere. So she definitely passes the first test, but what about the second? Does she ever stop being a tsundere? Is that character flaw eventually overcome? Does she ever make the transformation? Stay tuned to find out.
行くぞついてこいちょっと
この番組はご覧のスポンサーの提供でお送りします。And now, a 15-second ad. Hey everyone! You want to know exactly how much ad revenue the first love letter video made me? Less than $3. Patreon.com/Psy. Even if it's just $1, it helps. A lot. Returning to the plot, the crucial difference between NIMH and Yukos at this point is that unlike Yukos, it's very clear that NIMH knows a lot more than she's willing to let on. For example, during the mandatory beach episode, NIMH is getting picked on by some guys because she insulted them, and Tomoki tries to intervene, which looks like it'll cause a fight. But then Yukos appears from out of nowhere and goes, "Hey, what the fuck do you think you're doing to my master?" crushing the dude's hand, to which NIMH just smirks a knowing smile that says, "Oh, well that's interesting." Tomoki yells at her to stop, and the three of them quickly exit the scene. The next day, Tomoki apologizes to Yukos for yelling at her, and explains that she had reminded him of a humanoid weapon like you'd see in movies, and now he had hated thinking that. Now, all this comes to a head in episode 8, when Yukos and NIMH meet in an abandoned field and have that fight scene I talked about last time. She reveals that she is actually the electronic warfare angeloid, type Beta, NIMH, and that she is here to forcibly take Yukos back to the Synapse. So it turns out that Yukos is actually an incredibly powerful combat angeloid, and has had protections placed on her emotions, abilities, memories, and thoughts, essentially turning her into a doll, hence her inability to act like a human up until now. Of course, Yukos doesn't want to believe that because of what Tomoki said about her being a weapon, and so adamantly denies it. Then NIMH, being pretty overconfident in her victory at this point, decides to hack into Yukos and remove the protection that's been placed on her memories so that she can remember who she really is. The strategic warfare angeloid, the most powerful weapon the Synapse has ever created. Unfortunately for NIMH, though, once Yukos remembers that much, it's pretty simple for her to bypass the other protections and awaken completely. So Yukos turns the fight around on NIMH pretty much instantly, threatening to shoot her with what amounts to a nuke if she doesn't leave and go back to Synapse. She says again that she is nothing more than a pet-class angeloid, daring NIMH to correct her, and says that she's going back to Tomoki now. End of discussion. NIMH, knowing that she has zero chance of winning in a fair fight, concedes the battle, but threatens her on the way out, saying, "Gee, I wonder what Tomoki will think when he learns your little secret, little Miss Weapon of Mass Destruction." Now, short as this fight scene may be, it is a major turning point in the show for several reasons. Firstly, it establishes the Synapse as a major antagonist, something the series had been lacking up until now. Second, it leaves both Yukos and NIMH's character arcs in interesting places. Because Yukos won the battle, yeah, but now has all her old memories back, and is forced to keep secrets from Tomoki, something she hates doing, as well as live in constant fear that he'll find out what she really is and hate her for it. And NIMH, meanwhile, lost solely because of her arrogance, forcing this previously overconfident tsundere to run back to Synapse with her tail between her legs and beg her master for forgiveness. And thirdly, if you'll recall, Yukos had protections placed on her emotions and memories, and in most shows, after those were removed, she'd probably not really change all that much to reflect that. I mean, she's the main heroine. You can't completely change the personality of the main love interest halfway through the first season, right? Wrong. Now, granted, it's not a huge shift. As NIMH explains in Season 2, even when Ikaros's emotions are unlocked, they're still limited as a result of having boosted combat abilities and intelligence, but she definitely does change from here on out. I mean, one of the first things this previously emotionless robot does when she finishes fighting NIMH is to go back to Tomoki and cry into his shoulder, and then she ends up kissing him in the next episode. So, like I said, it's not massive, but it's interesting and unusual enough to take notice of. So, while Ikaros is going through her Iron Giant arc, interesting things are happening with NIMH. Like I said, she was forced to run back home to Synapse after losing the fight with Ikaros, and it's here that we're introduced to the main antagonist, Minos, and the rest of the Synapse High Council. One of the angels suggests that they just scrap NIMH since she's so useless, but Minos interjects, activating a card. He commands NIMH to, quote, entertain him, as we see that he's placed a time bomb in her collar. The message is clear. Capture Ikaros or die trying. And since NIMH is imprinted on Minos, all she can say is, yes, master. So after that, and with her life now on the line, we get this amazing moment where NIMH goes back down to Earth and shows herself to Ikaros for the first time since their fight.
楽しそうね、アルファ、ニフ。
Damn! Ikaros has no chill, straight into attack mode, I love it. But NIMH talks her down and begins her plan to kidnap Tomoki, and in doing so, blackmail Ikaros with his life, but through a clever series of jokes, accidentally ends up helping him with one of his money-making schemes, and has a lot of fun while doing so. She sticks around for a while after that, and is eventually won over by Tomoki's kindness. After all, everything that she's ever thought about humans is challenged by Tomoki, who treats her with kindness that she enjoys so much, while Minos regularly beats her and threatens to blow her up. So, realizing that she no longer has the heart to kidnap Tomoki, she decides to accept the fact that she's going to die, and tries to have as much fun as possible before that happens, inviting Tomoki on a date to the movies, the zoo, and finally trying to kiss him, all the while thinking, if only I had a nice master like Tomoki. So already, yes, NIMH has passed the second Sundari test with flying colors, but it doesn't end there. After the date, NIMH flies off into the mountains to die so that the explosion from her collar won't hurt anyone. And that's when Synapse decides to send two new friends her way, the Interceptor Angeloids, type Gamma, Harpy. So the Harpies emotionally manipulate NIMH into thinking that, oh no, Minos is actually really worried about you and wants you to come back safe and sound, so he sent us to help you out. So confidence in her abusive relationship restored, and that's totally what this is, by the way. This harem comedy has a plotline about abusive relationships and is handling it all with maturity and grace. God fucking damn it, this anime is amazing. NIMH decides to help the Harpies, quote, convince Ikaros to come back to Synapse. So, in the final episode of Season 1, NIMH brings Ikaros out away from town and tries to talk her into coming back, until the Harpies that NIMH had been cloaking just shoot her. NIMH goes, hey, that wasn't the deal! And the Harpies go, lol, we lied. Minos doesn't actually care about you, he just wants Ikaros back. To which NIMH responds by blasting the shit out of them. Unfortunately, the Harpies don't take too kindly to that and start beating NIMH up and ripping her wings out. And that's the perfect cue for Tomoki and the gang to show up. Ikaros, having self-repaired and finally back on her feet, activates her battle mode. But of course, this means revealing what she really is to Tomoki. But Tomoki, true to form, says that he doesn't give a shit. The reason that he said he was scared of her being a weapon back at the beach was because he hated the idea that a kind-hearted girl like Ikaros was designed and destined for nothing but battle. And besides, he says, right now, I'm glad you're a weapon. That means you can save your friend. To which the Harpies are like, fuck. A reaction that I enjoy immensely. And thus, the big final battle scene begins, with Ikaros using her full powers to absolutely wreck the Harpies, while Tomoki and the gang attempt to cut NIMH's chain, which would sever her connection to Minos and stop the bomb. But the interesting thing about this final big climatic fight scene is that it's treated more like a foregone conclusion. Like, well, obviously Ikaros is going to win now that it's a fair fight, And as such, it honestly happens more in the background, while the real focus of the scene is the conclusion of NIMH's character arc. All the while Yukos is fighting, NIMH is getting her chain cut and narrating over how for the first time in her life, she's finally happy. That's right, even during the big final fight, SNO cares more about developing its characters than it does about explosions. So Yukos beats the Harpies, they retreat back to Synapse, NIMH is finally free, Yukos no longer has to lie to Tomoki, and they all have a Christmas party to celebrate. End of Season 1. But that isn't the end of either of their character arcs. Far from it, in fact. Over the coming episodes, NIMH's new character arc is now about how she's a robot angel designed to serve a master without wings and without a master, and how that brings up all her old insecurities, but how she's still falling in love with Tomoki regardless, and how he becomes the emotional rock in her life. And Yukos, meanwhile, is still struggling with being human enough to please Tomoki, and how despite him wanting her to live a free life, that's not what she wants. And of course, all of this is done while the show introduces new characters left and right, all of which get developed in exactly the same way. Do you see what I mean here? Sure, SNO starts off with a bunch of cliches, but over time, it develops them into fully fleshed out characters, and by the end of the show, you wouldn't recognize a single one of them when compared to how they started off as. The emotionless robot and lowly tsundere might start off as being tired cliches, but Suu Minazuki uses that as a base to build off of, not as the central concept around which that character must revolve. And sure, Yukos and NIMH are great examples of what I'm talking about, but I could do an equally long analysis for almost every character in the show. I think it's testament to just how good SNO's writing is that every single friend I've shown the anime to has come away with a different favorite character. And that's because every character evolves as time goes on. Every one of them is interesting in their own way. And that, more than anything else, is one of the main things that elevates SNO above its contemporaries. Whereas other shows see cliches as the cheap and easy route to making a buck off figurines and Blu-ray sales, SNO sees them as building blocks, onto which you can add interesting and unique things. And once you've done that, they're not cliches anymore. They're characters. Continued in Part 3. Special thanks to my Patreon patrons, Isaiah Christo, Sawsbucky, Forgotten Paladin, Killy, Ludwig, Majerline, Mythnut, and an account I made to donate to myself to pretend I have more fans for all their support.